What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. So today we are going on a journey together. This case is very strange. There's tons of different information online, numerous different stories within this one story, and that is the disappearance of 25-year-old Samantha Sperry from Graves County, Kentucky. I believe she went missing in Simpsonia specifically, but that's questionable in my opinion. The circumstances are just strange to say the least. And there's even another disappearance connected to her disappearance that we're going to be getting into. But before I get into all the details of this case, I need to say a huge thank you to Audible for partnering with me on today's video. So Audible is the leading provider for spoken word entertainment, everything from audiobooks to Audible originals, podcasts, guided meditation, sleep tracks, you name it, they have it. With so many different genres, it's really easy to find an audiobook to nestle in with, or even a fitness program if you don't want to nestle in and you want to be moving your body. I have been putting up a ton of new fencing lately on my land, and that takes a whole heck of a lot of time. So I have been using that time to listen to audiobooks that have been on my list forever now, and the one that I was most excited about is the one that I just finished, and that's Verity by Colleen Hoover, who is quite possibly one of my new favorite authors. You guys may already be familiar with this audiobook, but it is basically a romantic thriller, which is something that I never thought I'd be into, but you guys, I could probably listen to this book over and over and over again. It's about a struggling writer that lands her dream job, essentially finishing out a book for Verity, who was the author and ended up harming herself in a car accident and was unable to finish it. I swear I've never experienced a jump scare in an audiobook before. I don't want to give anything away, but it ends up being just a crazy situation. She becomes so entangled in Verity's life and her home and all of her writings, and I really suggest you guys go and give it a listen. Audible has so many different genres, like I said, so if something like a romantic thriller isn't your thing, you can go and listen to true crime, podcast, histories, science, personal development. There's something for everyone. Members are now getting even more with Audible's new Plus catalog, which contains thousands of audiobooks, Audible originals, guided meditation, and all of that is just included with your membership. On top of that, Audible members get 1 credit every month that is good for any title in the premium selection, and everything in your Audible library is yours to keep forever. If you want to check out Audible, all you have to do is go to audible.com/Danielle or text Danielle to 500. Get 1 free audiobook, a 30-day free trial, and of course access to the Plus catalog. Thank you again to Audible for partnering with me on today's video. Audible has supported my channel for a very long time and has helped me make the largest donations possible to the families that I cover. So now on to this case. This is going to be a very interesting one to go through, and this is one that I also encourage you guys to kind of take as a starting point and go and do your own research afterwards. I've watched other videos on this, I've looked up other blogs on this, and it seems like no one that covers it can really get a good understanding of what actually happened. Because there is so much information out there, not to the fault of anyone covering it, there's just so much going on. The day that Samantha went missing is even listed as 2 separate days, possibly March 27th of 2018, which is when other witnesses claim to have seen her that morning in Simpsonia, and then also the 28th of March 2018, and this is the date claimed by the 2 last questionable people that were with Samantha. I'm personally going to be going with the date of the 27th because authorities question the story that she was seen on the 28th. So Samantha was described as being strong-willed and stubborn by everyone that knew her. Once she set her mind to something, there was no changing it. She was determined and she was getting it done. She was someone that was not afraid to speak her mind. She wasn't scared to stand up for herself or anyone else. Whatever she was thinking, you knew about it. She was confident, she was outgoing, and she was a force to be reckoned with. So when she got married and ended up having 2 children, it's no surprise that she was one big mama bear, and she did everything in her power to make sure she gave her children the best life possible. Samantha was also really, really close to her family. Samantha would see or speak to her family members at least every single day. They often picked on her for being a really awful cook, but everyone admired Samantha's green thumb. Her mom would always give her cuttings of flowers and other different plants, and without fail, Samantha would always be able to turn them into these just absolute thriving masterpieces. Samantha's life had not always been very easy. When she was a teenager, she unfortunately got caught up in drugs, and it really became a problem. But thankfully, she had a great family to push her back up. They got her into rehab, and she was able to get clean and turn her life around entirely. And from that point on, she was sober for 6 years, up until the point that she went missing. So I'm not sure exactly how long prior to going missing she had started using drugs again, but unfortunately that's something that she fell back into, and it may have had something to do with the fact that either she was going through a separation at the time, her and her husband were separating. I know that she was having to go to court due to custody agreements with the children. I don't know what that situation was. I'm sure it was causing her a lot of stress, but she also had started to date someone that was heavily, heavily involved in drugs. And that would be 30-year-old Ren Hendrickson from Simpsonia, Kentucky. According to a very recent interview done by Ren, and from my understanding, pretty much the only public interview done by Ren, Samantha knew him his whole life. They grew up in the same area. She was really close to his sister. He spoke about her sneaking into his sister's window at night, and they would hang out together. And from what it seems like, they dated on and off when she was a teenager before she got married. I'm not sure of that 100%. That's just kind of how it seemed from what he was saying. But Ren's family had a pretty bad reputation around not just Simpsonia, but pretty much every single county in the area. They were known for being heavily involved in drugs, as I said. From my understanding, they cooked meth, they sold meth, sold marijuana, they used both of them. They were also known for being thieves. They, according to different things I've seen online from the community, it was said they pretty much broke into every single shed in all of those counties. That's obviously probably an exaggeration, but people say that they pretty much broke into anything they could get into. They also had a lot of accusations against them from women saying that they had been sexually assaulted by a lot of the men in the family, including Ren. I have seen someone come out about that on the Facebook page. Now, according to Ren, Samantha didn't have any contact with him pretty much at all after she got married, and he hadn't spoken to her in years until she randomly popped up in his Facebook Messenger right before her disappearance. I'm assuming when the separation began. Allegedly, they met up and pretty much picked up right where they left off, and they started dating again. Ren said that they spent every single moment together, period. I think at the time he may have been living with her in Murray. I have never seen that stated anywhere, but based on him saying they always were together, I would assume that was the case, that he was living in her apartment in Murray with her. And he said the only time that they ever were separated was the night that she went missing. Another time when she had to go to court for custody things with her children. And then he said one other time, but I don't remember him being very specific about when that was. This brings us to Samantha's disappearance. So Samantha was last seen by friends and family around Simpsonia the early morning of March 27th, 2018. But into the day of the 28th, her family had been trying to contact her and she was not answering her phone. And this, again, was not like her. She always spoke to her family or saw them every single day. So for her to be quiet for an entire day was not like her. And it was alarming enough that her mom decided to call her place of employment that night and see if they had spoken to her. And unfortunately, they told her that she actually had never shown up for her shift that night at 9 p.m., which also was out of character. She was a very reliable employee. She never no-called, no-showed. But by the morning of the 29th, when Samantha had still not made contact with anyone, her parents went ahead and reported her missing. Now, her family was already aware that she had been struggling with drugs again. And just like the first time, they were ready to be there and pick her back up and were planning on helping her get into rehab. But unfortunately, she went missing before they could do that. But obviously, this made them very worried. Did something happen to her? Does she need help somewhere? Unfortunately, right off the bat, her disappearance was not taken seriously. Since Samantha had this history of drug use, Graves County Sheriff's Department straight up told the family that she was likely out on a bender and would eventually show back up. They had no plans of searching for her. They basically laughed in the family's face, said, well, she's a drug addict, and pushed everything away. But her family knew there had to be something wrong, and in my opinion, authorities should have known as well, because the day before, the 28th of March, Ren Hendrickson, her boyfriend, was also reported missing by his mother. On the 28th of March 2018, at around 7:20 p.m., Ren's mother frantically called 911. And she was basically saying that she just got a FaceTime call from Ren and she was worried about him and she needed someone to immediately go check on her son. According to Ren's mom, he was on the side of Dooms Chapel Road in Simpsonia, and he was saying that he basically took a bunch of pills and was planning on going in the woods to die. Authorities heard this, and you would think they'd jump into action, but they actually decided to not go and search for Ren that night. As I stated, Ren had a history, and one of the things in his past was that he had been considered a danger to police. There had been a few incidents where he had been armed during interactions with authorities, and they felt that it was not worth the risk going into the woods when it was dark outside with a potentially armed individual not in their right mind running through the woods with them. So the entire day of the 29th, from my understanding, no one was out searching for either of them until that night when Samantha's car was found abandoned on the side of Dooms Chapel Road, where Ren claimed he was going into the woods to die. Around the same time that this car was found, Dusty Holder, which is Ren's biological father, reported not Ren missing, but Samantha. And he had a very interesting story to tell authorities. So Dusty told authorities that he had been with both Ren and Samantha on the night of March 27th. He claimed that they came over to Paul Holder's house, which is his brother's house and Ren's uncle. I don't know if Dusty lived there or not. I'm just going to say he did for the purposes of this video, or it's going to get confusing. But they came over to this house that Dusty was at off of Tim Road. Now I'm going to put up a map. Tim Road and Dooms Chapel Road are 0.2 miles away from each other. Now, Dusty claimed that both Ren and Samantha came over, and he wasn't very specific. He either said that they had already been in an argument or they got in an argument when they got there. And apparently this made Samantha storm off towards the tree line on the back of the property for some reason, and Ren got into Samantha's car and left to go and stay at her apartment for the night without her in Murray. Now, according to Dusty, when the couple split up and went their separate ways, he got on a four-wheeler and drove out towards Samantha. And when he got to her, she said, "Hey, you're on a four-wheeler. I want to go for a ride." And she hopped on the back, and so they went on a ride in the woods. He said that when they got out into these woods, and I'll also have a picture of this as well, it's known as the Kaler Bottoms. It's a very swampy area, especially in the springtime, which this was because there is a lot of rain. It's known for flooding. There is a creek that's running through it. But when they got out there, they ended up getting stuck, according to Dusty, and lost. And they decided, instead of trying to walk back to his house, that they were just going to stay at the four-wheeler for the night. It was raining. It was pretty chilly that night. I believe it was in like the 50s into the 40s possibly. So they went ahead and kept the four-wheeler running so that they could have some sort of warmth. Dusty said he put like his jacket over it and they huddled under it. When the four-wheeler eventually ran out of gas, Dusty said that he then tried to start a fire, but the wood was wet, obviously, so I don't think it was very successful. Dusty said that the next morning, as the sun came up, they decided to try to head out to get out of the woods, and they ended up coming out at the bridge that's on Highway 131 right before Highway 131 splits off into 849. This location is only about a mile away from the house that they had been at. And he said when they got onto this road, he suggested that they go to the nearby Kaler Mart to warm up. They were both soaking wet, covered in mud, had a really rough night. But for some reason, Samantha said, you know what? No, instead, I'm going to go walk to a family member's house nearby. And so Dusty claimed that he went north up to the Kaler Mart, and Samantha went south on 131. And that was the last time that he saw her. Now, this story is interesting, but we'll dissect it more in a little bit. Once authorities had this strange story and Samantha's car had been found, they decided to finally search for her on the 30th. So at this point, she'd been missing all day of the 28th, all day of the 29th, and now on the third day, they're finally looking for her. But it seems like they may have known something was off already based on their actions, because they immediately called in a third party for help. Now, this unnamed person, no one knows who they are. I think they're literally just someone that grew up in the area, according to what authorities said. They were called in to help search for the four-wheeler. So Simpsonia, and specifically this location, it's a very small town, lots of wooded areas, lots of farmland, and you don't know the land unless you've lived on it. And this specific area of Kaler Bottoms was used a lot for like hunting, four-wheeling, and this individual knew this particular area like the back of their hand. So while this unnamed person is out in the woods searching for the four-wheeler for police, Dusty was brought in to speak to 3 deputies and a detective at the county sheriff's department. And he basically stuck to his story. Everything stayed the same. He said, he last saw Samantha the morning of the 28th walking south down 131. Now, they were able to find and prove that Dusty had in fact gone to the Kaler Mart that morning. I guess that the state he was in is what you would expect from someone that had been in the woods all night, but nobody saw Samantha, which, isn't too alarming because he did say she went a different direction, and he also didn't mention her while he was at the Kaler Mart. But the one issue with this is the fact that the time that he was claiming they came out of the woods right after the sun came up would have been shortly after, I believe, 7. And this is right around rush hour. And Samantha's family has pointed this out over and over and over again. 131 was a very important highway. It basically cut this county in half. It was what everybody used to get to and fro, basically. So school buses would have been on it, lots of people going from county to county or city to city to their different jobs. And not a single person had called in to report seeing Samantha. And while it wouldn't be super odd to see a woman walking on the side of the road, it probably would have caught someone's attention if there was this young woman walking on the side of the road, covered in dirt, head to toe, soaking wet. But again, no one said that they saw her walking south on 131. At this point, Dusty was told to lead authorities out to where the four-wheeler was. They essentially just wanted to corroborate his story. But while they were out there searching for it, this unnamed individual actually got to it first. So this person told authorities that the four-wheeler was in the state that Dusty claimed it would be. It was, in fact, out of gas. They did find a small fire beside it, which again corroborated the story. But there were quite a few details that were alarming. The fire that was beside the four-wheeler had 2 phones in it. Someone had attempted to burn 2 phones inside of this fire, and both of these phones ended up being traced back to Dusty. Why on earth would Dusty, while on this ride, first of all, have 2 phones on him, and second of all, why would he decide, hey, while we're out here lost and stranded in the middle of the woods, let's burn both of these phones? There was also only 1 set of footprints around the four-wheeler, and when the individual tracked these footprints out of the woods, there was only 1 set of footprints coming out. I have seen a report on an article and talk on the Facebook page that Samantha's keys to her car were also found beside the four-wheeler. But other than the keys, there's absolutely nothing there to lead authorities to believe that Samantha was ever in the woods. There was no spot where maybe Samantha had been sitting or laying down beside the four-wheeler. Her footprints weren't there beside the four-wheeler. Her footprints weren't there coming out of the woods and going south. There was absolutely nothing. And while all of this is happening, Ren is still nowhere to be found. Apparently, the media had been reporting that Ren and Samantha walked into the woods together and not Samantha and Dusty, and that Dusty came back and Ren went in separately and never came out. So you can understand here why there's already so much confusion in this case. That same day, authorities managed to get a warrant to search Samantha's home in Murray, where Ren had allegedly stayed the night of the 27th. Deputies from Graves County as well as Callaway County, where Murray is, executed the warrant. They did take several items from the home, but they have not stated what those items were, and they sent them off for testing at Kentucky State Police Lab. I have seen Samantha's family state that there was blood found during the search on the ceiling of Samantha's home. Now, I personally have not seen this stated anywhere. I guess they didn't even hear it from authorities. They had to hear it on the news. So I really don't have any more information to elaborate on that. But I think even if that was found and that is true, authorities probably wouldn't have said much about it anyways. 31st of March, there was no search. So authorities only searched on the 30th. Maybe they didn't search on the 31st because they were trying to figure out where to search. Because at this point, Dusty's story is not adding up. There is nothing in the woods that proves she was ever there. So I guess they just didn't know where to search. At least that's my hope. And it kind of seems like there really wasn't ever a search for Ren himself at all. They went to the area that Samantha went missing, but no one seemed too concerned to find Ren. Now, according to authorities, another search was held, however, on the 1st of April. And again, they went to Kaler Bottoms. They found no sign of Samantha ever being there still. That night, something bizarre happened. Ren Hendrickson stumbled out of the woods on Tim Road. He was dehydrated. He was hypothermic. And he said that he had been in the woods for 5 days when he walked up to this house. And I'm not sure what house he walked up to. All I know is that he was immediately taken to the hospital where he had to be treated. And the following day, he was taken to the sheriff's department for further questioning. Now, according to what I have seen in terms of this questioning of Ren, the main difference between Ren's story and Dusty's story when it comes to the night of the 27th and Samantha's disappearance is that Ren never speaks about a fight. He never mentions getting in an argument with Samantha. Still to this day in his most recent interviews, he still doesn't mention ever getting into a fight with Samantha. He actually has a completely different story, and there's actually 3 separate stories that I have seen online. I don't know if these different stories stem from the media, because I do know that the media was reporting something entirely false at the beginning, but were they fed that by authorities? Was it an assumption they made? Did this information start from rumor? Did, police give this? It's really hard to tell, and that's kind of why this case has been so frustrating. So the most common version of Ren's story that I have seen across the media and articles that I have looked into is that on the 27th, he did in fact leave. There was this argument that led him to leave. And on the 28th, he came back to the house where Dusty was at. And Dusty basically told him that Samantha was missing. To this version to the story, after hearing this, Ren flipped out. He lost his mind. He ended up leaving the house, only made it 0.2 miles away to Dooms Chapel Road. And at that point, he called his mom. This is when he FaceTimed her. He apparently told his mom all about Samantha being missing and that he believed Dusty was responsible for whatever happened to her. And then he took pills and went into the woods. I've also seen a version where Ren didn't know that Samantha was missing for some reason. He was over by the house he had been at with Dusty and Samantha. He was really messed up on drugs and just kind of took off into the woods, took these pills and came out. And that's when he learned Samantha was missing. Now, that's a very vague version of the story. I don't believe that's necessarily true. I think that is just something that ended up out there on the internet. But this last version of events is way more detailed, and it's from a recent interview with Ren that kind of mixes all of these stories into one and even suggests that Paul Holder, Dusty's brother, was at the house that night as well, which I find very interesting because you don't really see that mentioned anywhere. Ren claimed in this interview, which by the way, I highly suggest you guys go and watch it. I have it linked down below. I wanted to include the whole thing in here until I found out it was like over an hour long. So it's very important. I want to get your opinions on this interview. So definitely go down below and watch it after this video. But according to Ren, he said that he had a normal day with Samantha that day and they decided to go over to his uncle's house to hang out with his dad, Dusty. He said something about doing drugs at the bridge, which could very well be the bridge that Dusty and Samantha allegedly walked out onto on 131. Honestly, he didn't really get too deep into it. All he said was he was doing drugs at the bridge and then went to his dad's house. Now, Ren said that when they got there, everything was fine. They were hanging out. He does not mention there being an argument, but he did say that at one point he got on the phone and he was basically trying to buy more drugs. While he was on the phone trying to get a hold of more drugs, he said that Samantha kind of like walked up to him and was like, "Hey, while you're on the phone, I'm going to go four-wheeling with your dad." Now, according to Ren, this is nothing out of the ordinary. I know a lot of people find the fact that she got on the four-wheeler with his dad very strange, but according to what Ren has said, that's all everyone did in that area. Like when they all went over to his dad's house or anyone hung out, they would drink, do drugs, and four-wheel, and that's pretty much it. So he said it wasn't strange at all to him that Samantha was hopping on the four-wheeler with his dad and driving off. And he said after the phone call, he was just kind of sitting around waiting for them to get back. And after about 10 minutes, his uncle, Paul Holder, ended up coming to him and kicking him out, saying that he was too high and he wanted him gone, basically. Ren claimed that at this point, he got into Samantha's car to leave, and he said he didn't immediately just go home because he didn't want to just leave Samantha there, and she had left her phone in the car. So he said he did a couple of big loops, and if you look at the map, it's really easy to do loops in that area. And he states that he passed by the house 3 times, hoping Samantha would be out there, like ready to get in the car and go home. But by the 3rd time, he had to stop and head back to Murray to her apartment because he was about to be out of gas. And he said that also on this 3rd time, he noticed that the garage behind the house was dark. It was locked up, so he wasn't sure if they came home and like she went inside and wasn't planning on leaving with him or what. He figured that she would use someone's phone and call him when she was ready to come home, basically. The following day, which would have been the 28th, he said something about needing to borrow money from someone to get enough gas to get back to Paul Holder's house where his dad, Dusty, and Samantha had been. And he claimed that when he was on the way to the house that someone was following him. Now, he did admit that he was high at the time, and his exact words were he thought he was tripping, basically, and he was seeing things. But after a while, he said that he realized like there was absolutely someone in a truck following him, and it was making him super paranoid. According to this interview, he said that someone had been following both him and Samantha for weeks at that point. But again, there's like not really any way to prove anything that Ren is saying. So he claims he's being followed, and by the time he reached Dooms Chapel Road, he was about to run out of gas again because he couldn't get that much money from whoever he got gas money from. And so he was like, I have to pull over. He claims at this point he was so scared, he didn't know what these people were trying to do to him. They were revving the engine. So he jumped out, ran into the woods, and this is when he called his mom and said, I'm just going to pop a bunch of pills. And he said he hoped to die in the middle of the woods because he was scared and he didn't know what was going on. And while this may kind of seem off, I think it could be possible because he was involved in drugs. His whole family was involved in drugs, selling drugs, making drugs, all sorts of things. He could have easily owed money to someone. There could have been something going on to where he legitimately was like, dang, like these people are following me because I did X, Y, Z and they're going to kill me for it. And maybe he's just not telling people that, or the whole thing could be a lie. This is basically saying he didn't know that Samantha was missing at this point, and he ran into the woods because he was being followed by someone. Now, I found it so hard to believe when I was listening to this story that this guy got lost in the woods for 5 days. And if you look at the area, it's a very small section of woods. I have like the same size behind my house. I walk through it all the time. I've never gotten lost. And this is somewhere that he grew up. But according to Ren, the reason he was in the woods for 5 days is because the pills he took basically knocked him out. He said that he only woke up one time and it was in the middle of the night. He had no idea where he was and he eventually just like passed back out. And then he said when he finally came to on the first, when he made his way out of the woods, that he knew and remembered that he ran in there and he knew that someone had been chasing him, but he had no idea which direction he had ran. He didn't know how far he ran, and he was just confused about where exactly he was in the woods. He didn't know if he blacked out and like went somewhere all of those days and was like deep in the middle of nowhere or what. He said at this point, that's when he went and asked someone for help. He said his temperature was like 86 degrees or something, and that was after he had sat in front of a wood stove warming up for about an hour, and they took him to the hospital. He said it wasn't until he got to the hospital that he found out that Samantha was missing. According to Ren, they came in, the police, and they said, where's Samantha? And he said the first thing he said was, what do you mean, where's Samantha? Where's my dad? Because the last thing he remembered was that Samantha left on the four-wheeler with his dad. And this is when he heard that his dad said they got stuck and they eventually came out of the woods and went their separate ways. Now, Ren said that after he got out of the hospital, he went and spoke to police, as I already stated. He told them the story that he claims he told on the interview that I just spoke about. And he then went to ask his dad where Samantha was because that's who he last knew her to be with. And according to him, when he asked his dad what happened, his dad basically told him he was asking too many questions and told him to shut up. So Ren got upset and was like, if you got stuck out there, why didn't you just call me? And Ren said his dad said that he couldn't because he lost his phone, which we know isn't true because both of his phones were burned in the fire. He had them out there when they got stuck. But now we're stuck with all these stories and no one has any idea what the truth is. Like I said, I don't know if the media slipped up and told all these versions of this story. I don't know if Ren gave all these versions of the story himself. I have no clue what was said or what was done. None of it. So I feel like we need to take a logical look at all of these stories to try to kind of get to the bottom of it. So let's look at the first one, that Ren went into the woods on the 28th because Dusty told him Samantha was missing and he lost it, which is, again, the most common story that you see when you look into this case. Samantha wasn't reported missing by family until the 29th. And as far as Dusty knew, she just went off to be with family. For all he knew, she got to family. She was okay. I don't think he frequently talked to her, so how would he have known she was missing to the point that he himself reported it? And also, if he told Ren on the 28th she was missing and that's why he lost it, why did he then not report her missing until the 29th? And if he knew she was missing because family had called him, he wouldn't have then called again on the 29th to report her as missing. So this whole story to me either is not the real version of what happened because it just seems really weird and it doesn't match up, or Dusty absolutely knows what happened to Samantha and is trying to cover his own butt by running in circles. So now let's say that Ren went into the woods, messed up on these drugs for some unknown reason, came out, and that's when he found out Samantha was missing. Now, this could be plausible, as well as Ren's story that he recently told, except for the fact that car keys were found by the four-wheeler. When you look at it, it doesn't matter which version of these stories you think is true, because if the keys were in fact found by the four-wheeler, Ren didn't leave that night. Ren didn't leave and do a couple of circles. He didn't go back to Murray because the keys were with Samantha when she got on the four-wheeler. Now, this is where I have a huge issue with authorities not kind of like going in and chipping away at rumors, or the fact that the media has reported so many different things, because I've only seen that spoken about on one article but it's been posted all over the family's page, so that makes you think that it's likely very true. But when authorities have addressed the entire situation, they made a whole statement lining out interviews they've done, searches they've done, certain things they've found. The keys aren't mentioned. So were the keys found or not? And it's kind of important to know that, because if the keys were found by the four-wheeler, that totally discounts everything that Ren has ever said. Authorities won't speak on it. And that's really frustrating, because if that's just a rumor and those weren't found, I really wish they'd say something, get the media to take that information out, get people to, say something about that, because it really makes things look a certain way and totally changes the direction that this all is going. However, with all that being said, I am a firm believer that there is truth within the lies, and that can help lead clues to what actually happened. And some of what Ren has said kind of makes a little bit of sense. It's common, like I said, for everyone to go four-wheeling together, but I find it way more likely that Dusty and Samantha went four-wheeling while Ren was on the phone to pass time than I do that they got into an argument and Dusty just rode up to Samantha and she's like, "Hey, me and your son just got in a fight. Let's go on a four-wheeler ride while I'm upset." Dusty's story makes a lot less sense to me than the idea that they just went on a random four-wheeler ride while Ren was on the phone. But in the same breath, there's also parts of Ren's story that make absolutely no sense to me. Like the fact that Paul apparently kicked him out of the house because he was too high, when apparently that's all they did over there was go and get high. I mean, Dusty also was high. Samantha was high, according to what Ren said. So I don't understand, if it was such a normal thing, why Paul would be like, "Hey, you, get out and don't ever come back." There are just so many questions. Were they all just high and doing things that a sober mind can't make sense of? Is that why they just thought it was normal to hop on a four-wheeler after a fight and go? Or is Dusty lying and Ren is telling the truth that there was no fight? It's just the keys, I feel like that really, no pun intended, hold the key to what is going on here. Because if the keys were by the four-wheeler, how would Ren have ever left the house to drive around to get back to Murray? How did the car get on Dooms Chapel Road allegedly a day later when Ren ran into the woods and abandoned it? Or is all of this just one elaborate, messed up, scrambled last-minute lie to cover something up? Dooms Chapel Road, as I said, is 0.2 miles away from Tim Road where they were. And then Tim Road, as I stated, is a mile away from where Dusty claims he and Samantha came out of the woods. So you can see why all of this is so hard to believe, that all these people that grew up here their whole life, got lost, ran into the woods, were out for days, got stuck, couldn't find their way back, when they were in such a small area that they knew the back of their hand. According to Ren, Dusty grew up in this area his whole life, and he was the kind of person, if he got stuck in those woods, it didn't matter what was going on. If it was pitch black outside, he would have walked back. He would not have sat there willingly in the rain, in the cold, when he could easily walk literally a mile back to his house, which would take 30 minutes, if even. Ren also mentioned in his most recent interview that the four-wheeler was in a very interesting and what he believes to be important place. So there's something that he calls a grudge ditch. I have no clue what that is, if I'm being very honest. I've never heard that term before. But he says there's a grudge ditch and then there's the creek, which you can see the creek on the map. No clue where this grudge ditch is or what it is. But he said that the four-wheeler was in between those two. And according to Ren, the grudge ditch, you cannot pass it that time of year. So he said in order for the four-wheeler to get where it was, they would have had to go up onto the road, which I'm assuming is 131, and back down into the woods to where it was found. So that makes it even less likely that they didn't know where they were, because they would have just been on 131 and known they could just backtrack the exact same way and literally walk straight to the road that the house was off of. To add to all of this, authorities found that Samantha did in fact have family nearby. So again, the truth's within a possible lie. But the family was actually north on 131 and not south. And her family has made it very clear that she also grew up in this area. And first of all, there's no way she would have willingly, just like Dusty, sat out in the middle of the woods stuck. She would have tried to find her way back. And also, she would never have gone on to 131 and taken the wrong turn. She would have known exactly where she was at. And this didn't make any sense. And when you add that to her footprints not even being there, and again, no one seeing her on the road, the chances that Samantha was actually in those woods that night, or at least the location that the four-wheeler was found, is slim to none. And she definitely did not walk out of those woods with Dusty that morning. I've also seen that a search warrant was executed at the home they were all at the night of the 27th, but I have not seen if anything was found there. I have seen on the family's Facebook page that there was apparently blood found in a car on the property, but again, just like the blood on the ceiling, I have not seen that stated anywhere else, so I don't know pretty much anything about it. Samantha's family has also claimed that about 4 days after Ren walked out of the woods, he went to a junkyard and sold the junkyard a car. The people at the junkyard specifically remembered Ren coming there and told this to the family, but again, I don't know if that's ever fully been proven. So just a lot of sketchy things revolving around Ren and Dusty. Now, authorities also, for very obvious reasons, brought in Samantha's ex-husband. That's kind of like first place authorities go is a close loved one or a spouse. They also brought in most of her family for questioning, but from my knowledge, they were all, for the most part, just ruled out as being possibly involved in her disappearance. So we've got the family of Samantha ruled out, her ex-husband ruled out, so it wasn't a custody thing. And now we're just left with these two bizarre stories and a bunch of finger pointing and absolutely no sign of Samantha. Authorities claim that they brought in cadaver dogs. They say that they brought in helicopters. There were searches on horseback, on ATV, on foot, the whole 9 yards. And I have seen footage of some searches, but Samantha's family really questions if a lot of these searches were actually done. They believe that the authorities are saying they did certain things just to look better, but they actually didn't do a lot of them. Authorities have openly stated that all evidence they have found pretty much contradicts everything Dusty has told them, but they really haven't done anything about it. I find it odd as well that Paul was apparently in the home, according to Ren. I don't know if authorities ever confirmed that or didn't. It just seems like there's all these stories out there and everyone like following the case, and her family even are questioning what's going on and what's the truth or not. But authorities just aren't doing their job to clear pretty much anything up and leaving everyone very, very confused. And to top off the fact that they didn't believe authorities were doing all they could, there was apparently a property nearby that authorities claimed they desperately wanted to search. Like they wanted to get on this property and they just had no way to do that. But when they had the opportunity to, they totally passed it by. According to Samantha's family, there was a professional of some sort. I don't know if this is like a retired cop or someone like that was in the area, and they specifically smelled drugs being made, basically someone cooking meth, and they called this into police. It was on this property authorities had wanted to get into. They were worried, but it's very volatile. They were worried there was going to be an explosion. But like I said, when authorities had this opportunity presented in front of them to have a reason to get on this property, they were just like, didn't do anything. And I find that very, very interesting. So the sheriff's office was being questioned by family and the community, and it really became questionable 3 months into Samantha's disappearance when Grave County Sheriff Dwayne Redman was charged with drug possession and official misconduct. And this is who was making like all the decisions on the case, essentially. He apparently had been taking pain medication from the department's drug drop box. He did plead not guilty, but he ended up dying of natural causes shortly afterwards. We could get real conspiracy theory with this. The fact that the family that's involved in drugs, they're not doing anything about this questionable story. Ren, who's involved in drugs, goes into the woods and they just decide to not look for him. A property they can't get onto. obviously has meth being cooked on it, and they ignore that when it's reported. And then the sheriff is involved in drugs. It's just very questionable. And there's not been any connection made between Redmond and like the family or anything like that. And pain pills is very different than meth. But I feel like we don't know at this point, because he's no longer alive. Was he using these drugs himself, or was he selling them? Was he a part of some sort of drug operation? Unfortunately, a lot of cops get tied up and stuff like that because it's money and because they have the power to ignore it and make money easily. So they'll work with these drug dealers and everyone wins. Granted, again, this is all just speculation, but it's very strange that once he's about to go on trial for these drug charges and people can be questioned and cross-examined, that all of a sudden he dies of natural causes. Because of this, a lot of people believe that there could potentially be some sort of cover-up that was happening and why nothing was really done in the case. After Redmond passed away, John Hayden took over as sheriff. He was very well seasoned. He was actually retired and came out of retirement to become the sheriff of Graves County, and he announced that Samantha's case was going to be top priority. He made it very clear that he was going to do the best he absolutely could because the community and Samantha's family had also made it very clear they weren't happy so far. Within a year of Samantha being missing, so in 2019, new eyes were in fact brought to look at this case to see if, the sheriff's department missed something, if there was something more going on. So the Graves County Sheriff's Department presented the case to a lot of different agencies. They presented it to the FBI, they presented it to Kentucky State Police, they presented it to crime lab personnel. They also presented it to numerous attorneys' offices around the state, which I find interesting. I don't know if they were trying to see if any attorney thought they could pull off prosecuting someone, but basically they presented this to everyone. I don't know if it benefited them. I know that the FBI, according to the Sheriff's Department, the FBI said that the Sheriff's Department was already doing everything they could and that the FBI said there was nothing more they could do, but if anything ever changed, to just reach out to them. There was also one promising moment on March 2nd, 2019. And another crazy turn of events in this story. So authorities were searching on Bell Road and Dooms Chapel. They were searching with a canine team, and the dogs ended up alerting to an area. And when authorities checked this area further, they uncovered a bunker that had been dug into the ground and was hidden by a fallen tree. Now, one brave officer, it would never be me, decided to go into this bunker. And after crawling into the entrance, he got into an 8 to 10 foot tall underground room that was 20 to 30 feet wide. Y'all, that's pretty freaking big, okay? And it was all dug out. And it had the walls supported by plywood. There were boards on the walls. Y'all, there was decorations on the walls, posters. There was a twin bed in there. And there was also a 41-year-old man named Ernest, get this, Hendrickson. Y'all, you can't make this kind of thing up. This man was living in an underground bunker a few hundred yards away from other family members. And he wasn't just any man, he was quite literally a fugitive. And they had been using walkie-talkies to speak back and forth, him and the family members in the household, to make sure that he had stayed hidden. So authorities obviously were like, all right, this family has underground bunkers around this area. Is this the only one? Could there be more? Could he have information about Samantha? So they started to look deeper into it, and it turned out that he didn't have any information. He was actually incarcerated up until a month after Samantha went missing, which also means that bunker was empty when she went missing. Just throwing that out there. But he had been incarcerated for manufacturing meth, possession of a firearm by a felon, possessing meth, evading police, the longest list ever. Apparently, he was labeled as a fugitive in November of 2018 because he didn't go to treatment for substance abuse like he was supposed to. He was still actively using meth and alcohol, and he basically had entirely ghosted his parole officer. So from November 2018 till March 2019, he had been hiding out in this bunker. And while there wasn't necessarily a connection to Samantha's case, this obviously causes a lot of questions. How many more bunkers are there? What is this family capable of? Clearly the family is willing to protect and harbor fugitives. When Ren went into the woods, was he actually sleeping, or did he go to one of these bunkers? Is there another bunker that Samantha's being held in? I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And something important to note is that they had already apparently searched this area a handful of other times, I believe not just for Samantha, but also for Ernest, and they never found this bunker in all that time until this one time. So the chance that there's other ones out there that they just don't know of, you never know. They did also end up finding, according to family, a second bunker. So according to them, there's absolutely more than one. And they also found a bunch of drugs hidden all throughout the woods in that area as well. So all that does is just prove to me further that this family is very well aware of the woods. They're used to hiding in the woods. They hide in the woods to cook meth. They hide in the woods to hide their drugs, to hide from the law. And so I find it very hard to believe anyone got lost out there and didn't try to find their way back, because that seems like something they frequently did. Samantha's family has never stopped looking for her. They have conducted their own searches. They stood outside of the Kaler store on the anniversary of her disappearance to help people remember her. I know that they've done a few cash raffles, I believe, to help raise the reward. The reward is now at $10,000. I believe it was at $5,000 before, because with the people that you have, drugs possibly being involved, money can get people to talk. They do keep a Facebook page up and running. They're very active on it. There's a lot of their own information on there. So if you're interested in diving deeper into this and seeing their theories and what they know personally from being, involved in this and knowing these people most of their lives, I definitely suggest you go and check it out. And it's just really heartbreaking because you can tell that they've had to do a lot of investigating on their own, and they wake up in the morning, the first thing they think about is Samantha and all of these strange details that they've gotten from two questionable people, and whether anything that's been told is actually true. This family is desperate for answers. Samantha has 2 children that are growing up having no clue where their mom is and what could have possibly happened to her. And the older they get, the more questions they're going to have. Samantha's family has made it clear that they strongly believe that both Ren and Dusty have answers that they're not handing over. They think that many family members in that family could possibly be involved in this, and they're not falling for anything that Dusty or Ren have said. They know the history. Ren has come on in that interview and said he's not the same person. He doesn't do drugs anymore, he says. He doesn't sell drugs. He claims he misses her. His whole family really wants answers for her, and they miss her too. They had grown up with her as well. But I don't think Samantha's family wants to hear a word that he has to say. Ren also says he doesn't know what happened. He has stated he does not believe his dad's story at all, but that he also at the same time really hopes his dad wasn't involved. The interview is very important, in my opinion, for you guys to hear, because I have tried to watch his body language and pick up on little things that he says and where he slips up on his words, because he seems to be really pushing his innocence in that interview and basically saying that he lost everyone the day that Samantha disappeared because he doesn't trust anyone anymore. He said that he thought he could have trusted his dad with her, and the fact that she went missing and now his dad is basically telling him to shut up, won't talk to him. His dad apparently hasn't spoken to him since, won't look at him. He feels his dad knows more, but he just says he hopes that's not the case. You can see why finding Samantha has been so difficult. The last 2 people to be with her were heavily using meth at the time. Their stories don't match up. It's hard to believe anything that they do say, even if it does sound like they are trying to be honest. Dusty himself really doesn't say anything. It's only Ren who's talking. And it's been a constant battle of wondering if the police can be trusted to do their job. All the while hoping that Samantha, who is in the middle of this, can be found and brought back home to her children. Authorities say that they're still working on the case. As of October 2020, they stated that there was actually evidence that they were still waiting to be processed. Samantha's family has spoken up about this. They've stated there's only 2 different crime labs in the state. The first lab kind of extracts evidence, sees if there's DNA on anything. If there is, it then gets sent over to the second lab. But authorities still have this classified as a missing persons case. They have not stated that it's possibly a homicide or anything of the sort. So that's pushed her case back in priority. So between that and COVID, a lot of her evidence has just been sitting, from my understanding. Honestly, I don't know what to believe in this case. I don't think I've ever looked into a case before where I've seen so many different versions of events very openly stated. Usually I can get a good handle of, oh, this came from just a really weird source, and that's why it's odd. But we're talking about large news sources, local news, actual videos saying things that don't match up to anything they've said before or that police have stated, and I've never really encountered that ever when looking into a case. I don't even know if I believe she was ever actually in those woods. Whatever happened, in my opinion, that made Dusty go into those woods, I think it was done in a panic and it wasn't thought through. This is the only thing that I feel confident about. Because why would Dusty burn those phones? Clearly, he was trying to get rid of those phones in some sort of panic. There was something on them. And I believe he did them in a panic because anyone that was thinking something through wouldn't have left 2 phones to burn in a wet pile of wood thinking it would be done properly unless they were panicked and just trying to get it done immediately. It honestly, to me, sounds like Dusty made up a story to explain why he was out in the woods burning things, and also why Samantha was nowhere to be found at the same time. Maybe they did go into the woods and something was done with her somewhere else. I don't know if anyone tracked all of the 4-wheeler prints to make sure they went straight from the home to this location. If so, that's a pretty good indicator that Samantha was never on the back of that 4-wheeler. Were the keys actually there? Because if so, like I said, everything Ren said about leaving the house is a lie, meaning that he never did. The 5 days in the woods, was that him trying to get rid of something, get rid of evidence? He apparently took some items with him into the woods, according to what he told authorities, that belonged to Samantha. Why would Ren have gone into the woods to kill himself with random, things of Samantha's? And he says that they got lost along the way. Authorities were able to recover those items, but they've never said what they were or if they were relevant really to the case. Was there an accident and Ren really did care about her and he panicked? Maybe Dusty said that he would take care of everything. Ren went and lost his mind in the woods panicking. Dusty went and tried to get rid of evidence and did something with Samantha. Was it an overdose, or did she know too much information? Ren has stated again, take this with a grain of salt, that again, he was being followed. He said that he believed this was something bigger. And that was one thing he said in the interview that really caught my attention. He said Samantha got herself into something and she was in above her head. And he believes something much bigger was going on. He said, we're all looking in the wrong direction. This is something bigger. And it makes me wonder, were those phones used to call someone to basically give Samantha's location away? Had they been followed? Was the dad somehow involved in it? Was he the head of what was going on with the drugs? And he saw that Ren was being blinded by this love for this girl and was letting her get too close. I mean, we could go 1 million different ways with this information. Tell what you guys think in the comment section down below. Make sure to go to the Facebook page and support Samantha's family. That's where you can find out if you can donate to be able to raise the price for the reward. That's where they update on everything, the way they're feeling at the time, the different bits of information they've collected. So definitely go and follow that. Also watch Ren's interview that I have linked down below. On that note, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Samantha's story. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Howland fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.